Good evening. It's May 10th, 2022, and the time is now 6:03. I now call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. Pursuant to Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of the Governor's March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Urban Design Commission is conducted via remote participation. We will make recordings available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. My name is Courtney Kirk, co-chair of the Urban Design Commission, and I am joined by Andrew Grabinski from Planning, Preservation, and Zoning. I will start the meeting with a roll call of the commission members present. Frank Valdez. Absent. Andrew Arbaugh.
Present.
Tim Talon. Absent, and he says that he will be running late. Deborah Fennick. Can you
Did
just
you say
that?
Deborah?
Yeah.
Here.
Is it?
Sorry, and I'm gonna turn my camera off because I didn't hear that. Okay.
Okay. Sherry Ruane. Absent. Tim Hood.
Present.
Let's see here. Our first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from March 22nd, 2020. Do you all have any comments, or do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Motion made by Commissioner Arbaugh, seconded by Commissioner Hood. Roll call vote. Andrew Arbaugh.
Yes.
Deborah Fennick.
Yes.
Tim Hood.
Yes.
All right, the March 22nd, 2022 meeting minutes have been approved. I, as the co-chair, I'm going to take items out of order tonight. So this evening, we are going to start with the 483 Broadway project, followed by 153 South Street and ending with 99 South Street. So could the 483 Broadway applicant members please raise their hand to participate in the presentation?
I have promoted a Tavis Babbitt. Will you be the presenter tonight? You are self-muted, Tavis. Tavis, will you be the only one presenting tonight from your team? I will take that as a yes.
We still can't hear you.
You're showing as being unmuted, Tavis. Tavis, the issue may be with your the device you're using for your microphone. Make sure just to check it's on the right setting. I'm assuming you're hearing us.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you.
For some reason it wasn't working with my AirPods, which I always use, so.
Sometimes
Zoom
it's
are
strange.
different.
Yeah, when you change between platforms.
Yep.
Great. So just as a reminder, projects will have 20 minutes to present, followed by 20 minutes of commissioner discussion and voting.
Okay.
The 483 Broadway project is a commercial building, and tonight the commission will be taking the votes for a facade option if the design guidelines have been met for the MR4 district, and a vote to incorporate any additional design guidance. With that being said, I can turn it over to you, Travis, to take it away.
Yeah, I wasn't prepped too much on how this was going to go, but I'm assuming it's similar to other ZBA meetings, so I guess I'll handle it that way. Would I share the set of plans that we submitted? Does that make sense? All right, let me see if I can navigate that. Let's see here. How about that? There we go. Should have the set of plans in front of us there. So as you know, this is an MR.
Thank you.
Sorry, what's that?
Just wanted to confirm we can see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. So as mentioned, this is a MR4 zone, and we were seeking a variance for a couple of elements that we received. And so that was in order to keep the project in the scale with the neighborhood. And so that's why we only have a 2-story structure that we're proposing here, as opposed to the requirement of 4 stories. And so this is what we have so far generated in terms of our design. We were keeping as much of the existing building as possible and just extending it towards into Somerville. Right now, currently the building is existing here, as you can see in the top left slide there. And it's completely contained in Medford, so we would be adding into Somerville, and that's what puts us into the current status that we're in. With that said, the area that we're adding into Somerville here is a total of in Somerville it's 505 square feet. And so that is a relatively small in proportion to what we for the whole building. As you can see here, that red line is the line between Somerville and Medford. And so what we'll be talking about is the area that obviously that pertains to Somerville tonight in our facade and the exterior that we're working on. We've been looking at our building and site and trying to maximize what we have in terms of available space, not only for the use of the lot and the building, but also for the amount of area we can use for plantings and things like that. Based on our neighborhood meeting, there was certainly some input from the neighbors that said it'd be nice to have some green area, and so we're trying to do as much as we can with what we have. Obviously,
Travis,
Yes.
Travis, can I just pause for a second?
Sure.
Just want to make for the record that Commissioner Tim Talon has arrived in the meeting. Tim, can you
Very
say
good.
that you're here?
Hello.
All right,
Hi,
great.
Tim.
Thank you. All right, continue, Travis. Sorry about that.
No problem. So as we were mentioning, trying to make the most of what we can that's available. The building is existing, and our idea was to not disturb our boundaries with the neighbors on the existing sides, but just to extend to the area that's really not too usable otherwise at the moment with the new building. So based on that, we've worked up our green score, trying to get it high as we can. As proposed in Somerville, we have a 12.6% on that. And again, that's based on what we have available in the space we have in Somerville here. And currently there is, where the sidewalk is highlighted, if we go back to the existing site, you'll see that we had a curb cut currently right here, that on the existing site only was about 14.8 feet from the property line to the existing building and structure at the front entrance. So really not enough space for a car at all to park, but yet that is what people were doing, and therefore it was sticking out into the walkway that passed the property line. So really nothing could be used there for parking. And so our concept was to seal off that curb cut and allow parking along the street as it does down the rest of Broadway, and gain a few spaces that way that can actually be functional and usable. As we go down here, to our building, we can look at, and again, we got a variance approved for the height to keep it lower than what's required. There's a 10-foot height requirement for the second floor. We have that reduced as well. And again, if we look at our concepts here and the existing pictures, it really is a neighborhood of residential buildings around it. And even the Salvation Army building to the left is a relatively low structure. So we're trying to, again, mesh the two neighborhoods, so to speak, as we are on the border of both, and keep it in line with what's around it. You'll see a variation of wood structures as well as brick structures nearby. And some of those can be seen in these pictures, but not quite all of them. So based on that, we were trying to incorporate some of the brick that we have in a few of our, at least one of our renditions, but this was our facade option that we had initially thought of, with some wood siding, a different material, smooth surface for the parapet to kind of break up that. And then here you can see the existing brick structure that we were adding on to. And so that's where we'd start our facade for the entrance in the around the corner there. And so that is this element here with our plantings. We're trying to get as much as we can, obviously not a ton of space available for us. Our second facade is similar, but it's more of a traditional panel design on the corners, with some inlays and some wood panels framing in those openings a little bit more. Again, similar with the wood, just a little bit different take on that. And you can see that here as well. And then our final facade, we're really incorporating some more of that brick. So as you go down Broadway, you'll see more of this brick as you go down towards this direction, towards the center intersection there. And so this is trying to work some of that back in, and a little more classical detail around the windows with these arches and some overstated window sills as well. So again, the idea is really to try and come up with a facade that blends the two neighborhoods, but also is something that, you know, enhances the neighborhood, something that the neighbors will feel like, you know, that belongs here, and it's in the right proportion, right scale, and not really trying to make it look too massive and overbuild. And so that was really the concept for the look. Space-wise, it's going to be two spaces. The first floor is going to be one retail space, a smaller one for a tenant, and the other is the larger for Woody's Liquor Store, who's the owner of the property. I'm not sure if he's on with us today or not, but this would be his space, which has 2 stories, as well as the retail space, which has a storage space above. And so that was the intended use, is this would be storage. He does need a lot of storage. And then the second floor for the unit would also be storage. So at the moment, he doesn't have a tenant, but he was, you know, didn't want a restaurant or anything like that. So that was not in the plan. There was some talk about what would be decided on and how that would be governed, if it would be governed, who would be the tenant. But I think that does come under the purview of Somerville in terms of, you know, who rents the space. So that might be something that would be discussed. Another element that we discussed in our neighborhood meeting was mechanical equipment, which will be contained on the roof within the parapet. And so, you know, sound will be isolated from that. They won't be actually located in the Somerville portion of the building. They'll be in the Medford portion towards the back. But that considered, we did talk about sound and how that would affect anyone nearby. But based on what we had in our specs from the mechanical engineer, the volume and the decibel level was much lower than was could be considered the maximum for at street level. So we should have relatively no impact on the sound, at least on the Somerville side. And the overall building height, we're at 24'7" from the ground up. So that's really the parameters of the project, and, you know, why we're at the point where we're at in terms of scale, size, area, footprint. Happy to answer any questions, but at this point, I think we can, you know, turn it over to the commission.
Thanks, Tavis. Commissioners, do you have any questions at this time?
Can we just confirm the setback from the back of curb is 12 foot? I'm not sure I saw that dimension on any of the plans.
Say that again?
Can we confirm the setback of the face of building from front of curb or back? I think it's just making sure that it's the 12 foot required.
Okay, so we have, well, if we put a dimension on this curb here on the sidewalk, we have 4 feet from the property line to the building. I know that much. But I'm not sure what the sidewalk is. We don't have a dimension on that depth.
Okay. It looks like it makes it, but it would be good to confirm.
Yeah, sure. That's a 12-foot requirement, so I'll make sure we have that.
Deborah, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one is, it has a very heavy top, and I'm wondering what happens at that top. Anyway, aesthetically. And my other question is, I see a garbage can or a recycling can or something in the front of the building
Yes.
on the corner. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you looked at ways of accommodating that. It's not putting it out on the sidewalk.
Yes. That came out of our neighborhood meeting. There was a request for a trash bin. The architect put it on there and just so it would be represented somewhere. But I'm sure that won't be the final location or look of it. But that may be one of the things that they had available to put in there as a graphic. But it would be a more appealing trash, I would hope, than just a bin like that. So it was in order to address the need for nips just being consumed and then thrown on the ground. So that was one of the concerns that a neighbor had. So in one form or another, we will have a trash container there that will be more incorporated and less obstructive like that. But in answer to your question in terms of top heaviness, the building extends up as a result of a parapet that we have going around to really hide the mechanical equipment and also contain the water runoff and to direct it to the scuppers that we have going out to our downspouts. So if I go to the section here, you can see exactly what that looks like from my right here in this area here. So it's, I mean, it's one of those fairly common architectural designs for flat roofs, but that's what's happening up there, in case you want.
Yeah, I'm just, I think it would be great if that garbage can were not on the street or outside.
Sure.
Or the building created a place for it where it could be hidden from the sidewalk. Anyway, but I appreciate that you have it there, so it could be just talked about and it's something that you resolve at some point.
Sure.
And then the only other question is, the canopy is only, doesn't cover all the windows, I imagine. Oh, what's the exposure of this? Is this the south side of the building?
Let me see here.
I'm just curious, what the
Myself.
thinking is on the canopy and why it doesn't go all the way to the
Yep.
ends or just the
It's slightly
doors.
askew
Or...
from south. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the south corner, you could say, right on the border of Strathmore and Broadway. So it is fairly bright there, you're right. And yeah, extending that to the ends certainly seems reasonable. Yep.
Yeah, depends on the function of it. Is the idea that it, well, it is shading the windows to some extent. Okay.
It
Yeah,
is.
so then it probably would make sense. That was more functional. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
One more question on the
Question.
survey. One more question on the survey real quick. There's a 3-foot passage shown. Is that
Yes.
an easement on the other property or what is that?
I believe it is an easement. It's not part of our property. So it's some sort of access, but I'm not sure exactly what it's for, but it's not encapsulated in our property. So I'm not exactly sure why the engineer put it on there, but it's outside of our footprint or out of our lot.
Any other questions from the commission?
Has there been any discussion of adding street trees along Broadway?
There will be.
From our end, we have not discussed anything along those lines.
All right then. Tim Hood, did you? Okay, please go ahead.
Sorry, a couple of the images had, it was noted with the trash can, and then I just wanted to ask about the signage and the pole there that was shown. I don't know if it's shown in all the renderings, but is that also the intended design for signage?
Yes, I believe that's already been updated based on the city's sign requirements and size and things that the owner had that done recently. So it has been updated, replaced. So that is, the intent was to use that sign. That did come up in our neighborhood meeting about putting this sign, on the building itself. The owner said that he had already been through it with the town with the existing sign, and based on visibility and how people would see it and notice it, that was the preferred method for him. And so he did update that sign to be new, and I think that's reflected in this rendering here.
Just for clarification on this too, so the Woody's enters through the right-hand one of these doors, and the tenant enters through the left. And what is this? I guess what is the material between them, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so at the moment that we had a few different versions of that, so the plan may not reflect that as accurately, but yeah, I mean, you see it sometimes in commercial buildings where you'll have kind of a glass facade where you'll have a dead wall that comes into it, and so that would be a tinted glass panel in between and at the top. So those two would hide the wall separation between them, but the wall is directly in the middle in between those two. So it's one of those games you play when you have interior space and outside windows. You're trying to make it all look uniform. That could be done differently. I mean, it could be a solid piece in between with two separate pieces above. And I'm not sure that the architect has worked that out completely yet. So.
All right, commissioners, do you have comments at this point?
I think a streetscape plan would be helpful. I would definitely coordinate with the city to understand if and where we can place street trees, if there's a vision for Broadway that has some sort of understanding of what the materiality would be in the amenity zone of that 12-foot setback that we have. I think that would be good to start with. For me, if I wanted to, I think the nips issue is real. Like I definitely, I have found the nips in my yard. They are a pain in the butt. If it were me, I guess I would be trying to work with the city to site a big belly in this location, as opposed to trying to kind of deal with it with a bin, which doesn't seem ideal. But I think the streetscape just sort of generally needs to be progressed in a way. I guess I'm a little, and I'll kind of leave this one to the architects. But I guess for me, like it does seem a little odd. The building, it looks like a single use building right now. I'm not reading the two tenants would be, or two separate businesses would be using this space, just the way that it's, the facade is set up. And that seems a little bit confusing to me. And then I guess the last thing is just within the green score plan. I understand that the city's going to sort of figure out how to deal with green score on sort of this weird situation. I would say in the plan right now, there's that kind of row of spirea that's on one side of the building. It's not set in a bed that's big enough to accommodate it. So I would consider something else, or letting that idea go. I think it's shown in like a 1 foot wide bed, which is not gonna work. Spirea is tough, but that's hurtful.
Okay.
Is the brick that's shown in this image, is that intended to be the brick of the existing building that's being built
It is.
around?
Yeah, the
So
idea
that-
was to leave as much of that as possible.
Okay, so that remains unchanged, then you're building around that.
Correct.
And so those openings, the two doors, the window and that, those are existing openings that are, maybe a door's getting replaced or something within that, but
Exactly, yeah. Let me just confirm the back door. I know that this one is the basement access, which we're not changing, so, but the other one, just make sure that it's existing. Yes, we'd be adding that other door. Right now, as you can see in this picture, this is the basement door, so we'd be adding one in this back corner. So this one here would be a new door, that last one at the end.
okay.
And
You haven't
that
done the width of that sidewalk on that street? On Strathmore?
Let me see if it's on the site plan, but I don't think you put many dimensions on the site plan on this walkways. But it looks to be fairly wide one there. I would say it's probably a 5-foot sidewalk.
Yeah, so my concern would be if it's a 5 or even a 6 foot, maybe a 7 foot sidewalk. Especially if you're adding program to the building, if the door is getting used more, swinging into the space of the sidewalk. Whether there's the opportunity to pull that door swing within the footprint of the building. It doesn't look like it on this plan. I guess if it's an existing door.
Right, yeah,
Is
this
that-
should,
is it-
so that,
Is the intent that deliveries go in there?
I think refrigerated items, I'm not sure. That would be a question for the owner on use for that, because it goes right into the walk-in cooler, which is kind of a unique scenario. I'm not familiar how often that gets used, but my guess would be they would probably be loading some cooler items directly into there. That would be my guess.
No. Is that right at the property line?
This wall is right at the property line, correct?
Okay. So I think overall on the facade options, I'd be concerned about something like option 3. You're rendering the what now I understand as new brick and old brick to be the same. I doubt there's really going to be the ability to match that whole process, which can be extensive. So I think either the brick is clearly different on the new building, or it shouldn't be used on the new portion. I think maybe Deborah was going to go here with her comments, but I think the top of the building does feel heavy to me. There's no reason why the cornice needs to align with the roof level exactly, and have the entire parapet rendered in a different material. So I think proportionally there's an issue there that I think is resulting in an overall composition that's a little accomplishing something different than you described. I think creating something that is out of scale with some of what's around it. And I think I wonder if these really are two separate tenants. The pier element along facing Broadway, it seems like there'd want to be a solid separation between those. understand the intent to kind of run a solid wall into the back of a mullion or something, even though the mullion isn't shown. But I wonder whether that's really the right approach here. I think it would be helpful to understand what the plan is for signage, tenant signage on the building. I know there's a freestanding sign, but I'd assume that there's going to be some tenant signage on the building as well.
Yep, okay.
And just last comment, the side, and this just kind of goes to overall proportion. There's something weird going on with the height of the doors on the elevation. They look like they're about 5 feet tall, like it's like a door in a preschool or something. So I think we need to see elevations that accurately reflect what's going to get built.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim, if you're done, oh, whoops. Okay, so I'll go. So I agree with you about the parapet. That's why I asked the question. It needs more articulation. And in terms of, I can say that I have a preference for the second option, the darker one. It feels more in the scale of a commercial building. The first one I'm looking, I shouldn't be looking at I've got the screen on bigger. Yeah, the one we're looking at right now looks, like it's trying to look residential on the top level and commercial on the lower, and it's all a commercial building, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I like the idea of the darker, treatment on it, and something that sort of unifies the building and just makes it look larger and more commercial.
Okay, appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with the comments on the upper portion. It does feel heavy, and just kind of the way that it's rendered, it's just coming across a little bit too flat. So maybe, as it was pointed out, maybe some articulation at the cornice, and maybe it can be shrunken a bit. And then I was wondering about the relationship between the second floor and the first floor. It looks like the upper story windows don't necessarily have any sort of relationship to the curtain wall and the mullions down below.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it might be a good idea to look at, trying to tie in the upper story windows with the windows below, and the first floor awning, if that can be also kind of aligned with a window above or a mullion below, because right now it's kind of floating in between. It doesn't tie into the architecture. I would also say my preference would be the second one in terms of color and style. This being a MR4 site, we typically try to stay away from kind of like the horizontal siding material, and I understand, it gives more of a residential look, and there's adjacent properties that kind of have that material, but this being kind of more of a commercial building, I thought if it may be more of like a panelized look might be more appropriate for that second story versus the siding.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Okay.
I know that it was talked about the sign and the pole, but it does seem very strange to me to not have the signage on the building. I'm curious as to how this building is going to read with the two tenants and their own signage as well. And then I think the it was also noted about the proportions of the doors and the glass at the first floor. It would be nice if there was a hierarchy of glass. Right now, the horizontal mullion in the middle is kind of going right through. It makes it feel a little strange. So if that could be looked at and maybe given a hierarchy of different proportions of glass there.
Makes sense.
So we're coming close to time. It sounds like I've heard a couple of commissioners favor facade option number 2. Would I have a motion to approve facade option 2?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
So if we're approving it, are we seeing it again, or are we just pushing it through?
I think this is up for you guys to decide. Would you like to vote on a facade option and have them make revisions and come back?
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
I'm fine with facade option 2 with revisions and continuing the project.
All right. I will take a roll call vote for I'm sorry, let me do this again. I will take a roll call vote that the 483 Broadway project facade option 2 is approved to move forward with revisions. Commissioner Fenwick,
Yes.
Commissioner Tallon,
Yes.
Commissioner Arbaugh,
Yes.
Commissioner Hood.
Yes.
All right, we at least got that out of the way. And then do you all feel that the design guidelines have been met, or
We
I
hold
think
on
not
voting
yet.
for the next round.
hold on that to the next round? All right.
Yeah.
So summarizing,
There
I'm
is
just
one
gonna,
other comment I'd like to add.
sure.
I think one other thing that is kind of subtle, but there's something going on with the portion and kind of the rhythm of the facade too. And I realize that's because the doors, it's a very symmetrical seeming facade, but it's not quite symmetrical. The doors are slightly offset so that you have a slightly closer spacing on the left side, a wider spacing on the right. The windows, I think to Tim Hood's point, aren't quite registering with anything on the lower floor, and there's a different spacing between them. I think you've deliberately chosen kind of a more traditional classical language here. I don't think that's necessary for this street and this environment, but that's the direction that you've chosen, which is fine. But I guess I would encourage you then to kind of be true to that. And I think there's plenty of examples of 2-story commercial storefronts that were built in the late 19th century, early 20th century around Somerville. Even the simplest ones are pretty true to basic kind of rhythm, spacing, equal spacing between windows, things like that. So I'd encourage you to just maybe take a look at a couple of those existing older examples and kind of use that to inform the further development of the facade.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'll definitely relay those thoughts to the architect.
All right, so I'm just going to summarize a little bit of what the commissioners have requested that the design team work on to come back with further development of facade option 2. So it sounds like it would be great to confirm the sidewalk dimensions and that there's a streetscape proposed since you're closing off that driveway, a very large driveway curb cut. That there needs to be some more clarification between the two doors and the two distinguishing between the two tenant spaces. And it seems like there's a lot of questions that were raised around the signage and if the existing street pole sign is adequate to also distinguish between the two tenants and their spaces. It sounds like that the cornice and the parapet can be worked on and studied more to make it not seem so like a giant one continuous piece on the roof. That there's not quite a symmetry in the facade, but sort of revisiting that the windows from the upstairs and the below the first story windows and having a better relationship between the architectural elements and the window elements. I'm going to use my own language. I'm not an architect. And that perhaps the front, some of the older, two-story shops, someone has a shop on the ground floor, that perhaps there's some cues from those as architectural references, and it's not just referencing the residential materials in the neighborhood to make this seem more like a commercial building. And I think there were questions about deliveries. If we can clarify that, since Tavis, you said you weren't sure and you'd have to check with the owner. Let's see here. I think, does that sound like a good summary?
Yeah, there are other
Great.
things,
That's
but I
great.
got those notes.
All right. So with that being said, do I have a motion to continue the 483 Broadway project to the next meeting?
No motion.
All right, motioned by Andrew. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by all of you guys. I saw Deborah's mouth move first, so I'm gonna count her. So roll call vote, Andrew Arbaugh,
Yes.
Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you, 483 Broadway. We'll see you next time with a further developed facade number 2.
All right, thank you very much for all of your comments. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right. The next project on the agenda is 153 South Street, Thoroughfare 1.
I'd like to recuse myself from this project.
Let the record show that Commissioner Arbaugh is recused from this project. If the 153 South Street team can make themselves known so Andrew Gruminski can promote you.
Hello.
Hi, Ian.
Hello. I think it's just me, although Rolla from Leggett McCall may speak. So if there's questions, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll get started here. So thanks for having us. This is our second UDC. We met with you back on the 26th, 2 weeks ago, and we have some response updates following up on the comments that we received. So what we heard on the 426 meeting, there was a question about shadow studies and the considerations to be taken into for the design of the thoroughfare. We had some questions about circulation overall. We touched on the ground floor active uses and entrances. We have a slide to show that. We had some comments about the materials in the thoroughfare itself, so we have some studies to show that. We did not show a lighting concept previously, so we have something to that effect to share with you. And then we had some questions about bike parking relative to the civic spaces, so we have a study to show that. So jumping right into the shadow studies, what we have are the combined composite shadow studies that were prepared based on the approved master plan in 2020 and then amended in January of this year. And so the graphics that you see, the gray shadows are the shadows that were in the original master plan, and the blue shadows are the new shadows that were produced by the amended master plan. The new buildings are the pink buildings, and the blue buildings are the ones that were in the original master plan. So we have a series of slides going from March all the way through December that show how the shadows impact the thoroughfare. Of course, you know, this is an urban development. The master plan intentionally is trying to have an efficient and integrated compact development. And with that, of course, entering into the equation is shadow. So that's something that is part of this type of development. And I think we recognize that, you know, this is sort of an existing condition because the master plan, both the original and the approved amendment in January, are sort of an existing condition that we are now kind of working with as we advance the more detailed design of the thoroughfare. So needless to say, we know that parts of Thoroughfare 1 are going to experience shading throughout the year. There are some pockets, as you see, where there's good solar exposure as you move through the seasons and depending on location. We believe there's an opportunity because of the nature of the design and the fact that we have these kind of flex parking zones where we are showing the ability to have kind of movable furniture that we can actually, through the course of the year and course of the seasons, we can move that seating to take advantage of some of the sunnier areas depending on where you are in that time of year. And then, of course, you know, with plant selection, we do have to be mindful of the lower light levels. We have at our disposal understory plants that will do fine in areas of lower light. So I think, you know, that's something that we can certainly continue to refine as we move through the design. So here's March. I think you can see that obviously in at noontime, the thoroughfare where it abuts the civic spaces has really good solar exposure, as does on the axis of Earl Street where it touches that portion of the courtyard at 6A and 6B. And then moving into June, of course, you'd expect this is the least impact in terms of the shadows. It's interesting to note that generally the amended master plan for the new buildings really doesn't affect the thoroughfare at all, except for at the end of the day in June when that solar path is sort of casting those shadows down to the lower right. So there's a portion of the thoroughfare that is actually in shadow from the revised massing on building 5 and 6A and 6B. And then moving into September, which is the same as March, as you know, a lot of the same conditions in terms of that solar aspect. And then in December, long shadow. So it's you know, very much in shadow for most of the time. Of course, at noon, you do have good solar exposure at that central part there. So again, we wanted to share this with you because we didn't have it before. We will continue to be mindful of where the shadows are, again, with our plant selection and the placement of movable furniture. I think the next thing that came up was really a discussion about circulation and how that would potentially affect the amount of traffic or the travel on Thoroughfare 1. So I wanted to go back to this slide that kind of clarifies the different degrees of vehicular travel in the neighborhood. So the thicker pink lines are the primary paths of travel for cars, and the thinner are the secondary streets. And this is something that came through in the traffic study that the project has commissioned. And again, that idea of straightening South Street is that dashed line that you see right there. Essentially what we're expecting and what the traffic studies seems to suggest is that we expect the bulk of the traffic, were it to come from Webster onto Columbia, which is where my hand is, would travel easterly, but then probably turn down Windsor Street and then down South Street to gain access into the various components of the building. we think that the design of Thoroughfare 1 really is going to discourage and become a less attractive option for people traveling by vehicle, by car. And part of the reason we feel that way is because in addition to the studies that we're doing for Thoroughfare 1, you may be aware that there's kind of a summit of development and the city players in terms of the revisioning of Columbia Street and Windsor Place to the west of Thoroughfare 1. So in other words, there's a concerted effort now to kind of bring a much more robust and integrated level of pedestrian circulation and bike facilities on both sides of that road that would link from Webster into the Boynton Yard site. And so we think that, that's going to be a very attractive corridor for bikes and peds. And through that process, the travel lanes are going to be narrowed down for vehicles. So again, that's going to further discourage path of travel for the cars coming into this portion of the site. And then to talk a little bit about how the buildings themselves are accessed. So with regard to Thoroughfare 1, Building 5 and Building 6A and 6B really don't have any direct vehicular access immediately off of Thoroughfare 1. So in the case of Building 5, the development team from 600 Windsor, which is on the upper left-hand side, and the Boynton Yards team are working with the city to develop a shared drive concept that would basically be an extension of Windsor Street. And so the idea there is that there'd be a shared drive that provides the loading dock access to Building 5, but also to the 600 Windsor parcel. So the trucks would never need to go on Thoroughfare 1 to get to Building 5. And then similarly for Building 6, there's a spur of road that comes off of Harding Street, and that would allow the loading dock to be located on the eastern side. That's what the clear white triangle shows. The dark triangle is the access into the garage, and you'll see that there's only one access point, and the reason for that is that below Building 6, below Building 5, and even under below Civic Space 3, the idea is that that's a continuous garage structure. So all car access for parking into the garage would be coming off of Harding Street and into that eastern side of Building 6, basically, even for Building 5. And then, of course, for Building 2, which is here, Building 1, 101 South, and the proposed Building 3, all that vehicular and loading dock access will be happening off of either South Street or off of that shared Earl Street sort of alley condition. And then the pink triangles show where we think the primary building entrances would be for the pedestrians, for people coming in off of the street. There was a question about how the first floor activated uses related to the thoroughfare. We apologize for not having this in the set before. This was an oversight on our part. We intended to share it, and it's a good story. So basically what you're seeing here is the blue would be the lobby entrances into the buildings, and then the purple would be those activated retail or arts and creative uses. So you can see that we're really, in terms of activating the thoroughfare, we're providing all of that active first floor uses sort of fronting on the entire length of the thoroughfare. And then again, just showing how some of these building entrances work relative to those first floor uses. And then we had a question about, well, how does rideshare, Uber pickup, drop off, things like that happen? We hadn't really fully looked into that at our previous presentation, but in this one, we are now indicating that we think, sort of relative to a common spot between the lobbies of Building 5 and Building 2, that there could be a designated zone shown here in green that would be that zone. And then maybe there's one that's sort of, coincident with where Earl Street comes into the thoroughfare, where there could be an opportunity for pickup, drop off here that would kind of service those three buildings. And of course, there's opportunities off of South Street for 101 South and 99 South in terms of that drop off area. So then another comment that we had was kind of, digging further into the details of the material in the thoroughfare. I think Sherry had a really good comment about, we were sort of approaching it as having these sort of isolated, compartmentalized opportunities or moments rather of different materials, like crossing across the civic spaces and then maybe again at Earl Street. And what that did is it sort of broke down the flow of the thoroughfare and kind of made these discrete compartments basically. So the concept of the challenge is really to kind of take that idea but extend it through the entire length of the thoroughfare, and to use that to not only make the thoroughfare itself feel like a continuous plaza, but also find ways to kind of integrate that shared drive area with the side areas and the access into things like the civic space and the courtyard. So the concept here, we have two to show. The first one is this idea of a modular concrete panel system. So you can see that there's kind of a regular grid pattern, a staggered grid that we're proposing. And the idea would be that we would use different types of integral color or aggregate exposed finish in those panels to create some interest and create kind of a meandering line that would draw your eye, and also just kind of make it feel less like a road and more like a public space, more like a plaza, and then have an opportunity for that pattern language to extend into the civic spaces and maybe extend into the courtyard of Building 6. So we really like this, and we think that there's opportunities here where, you know, of course you have to get back into the road and open it up for utilities. There's a logic or a pattern here where you can kind of saw cut along the pattern, the joint lines rather, and remove the concrete, do what you need to do, and then replace it with something that would be, you know, sympathetic to the overall concept. So that's the first option. And then the second option is one that might be a little bit more artistic. And the idea here is kind of taking a pattern language, taking something that could be rooted in color or shapes, and use, you know, kind of a stamp or imprinted material potentially to really make this thing feel not like a public art installation, but really something that is more of a public realm that really is a rich, vibrant experience. And again, there's an opportunity, we think, to maybe take some of that pattern language and extend it into the flex zones that we had talked about. So there's a really strong sort of blurring of what's road, what is shared, and what is truly pedestrian. In terms of lighting, we prepared this night rendered shot that just kind of shows how we envision the light to be distributed throughout the thoroughfare. In terms of what the light fixtures themselves will be, because this is a city street, or it will become a public city street, we are going to use the city standard fixtures. So on the left-hand side, the shorter post top is the light that would be used in the longer stretches of the thoroughfare, while the taller arm and pendant fixture would be what is proposed at the intersections of streets. So like at the end here, there would be the taller fixtures. At Earl Street would be the taller fixtures, and then on Harding, and then in between you would have the run of the shorter, more pedestrian scale fixture. And then the last thing to share just has to do with bike parking. So the comment was really just sort of understanding where the bike parking was relative to the civic spaces, and recognizing, I think rightly so, that there's probably a strong desire to have bike parking in close proximity to the civic spaces. Of course, Civic Space 1 doesn't have any bike parking itself within its parcel limits, but there are bike parking spaces associated with Building 2 and Building 1 on either side. And then we just kind of did a blow up here that shows that on the north side of 101 South, we have a bank of parking here, which is actually pretty close to the civic space itself. And then there's a row of them on this north side of the thoroughfare as well. And the other thing that we've talked about in response to that comment is that in Civic Space 3, we're going to develop a kind of combined parking area where we can have up to 20 bicycles and other sort of scooters or other mobility type vehicles that would be located within that civic space. So that would be right sort of centrally located. And then the last thing to point out is that the development is committed to providing blue bike stations, 3 stations of 19 bikes each. Those have not been located yet, but that's something that we're going to be working through with the mobility department. And with that, I think that is our last slide. So happy to answer any questions or go back. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have any clarifying questions? I'm seeing no clarifying questions. You guys ready to jump in?
Yes. I can start. I appreciate the comprehensive presentation. No questions because you addressed all of, I think, the questions that I had. Certainly, I think, so where to start? Maybe kind of starting at the macro level and kind of the broader circulation within Boynton Yards. I think those diagrams are very helpful in understanding that. I think what they highlight is that I think to accomplish a lot of the things that you're talking about, the ends of the street are going to be very important. How that's treated to really make it feel difficult to go straight from Columbia and Windsor onto the street. And I know that's probably a further level of development, but I saw there seemed to be kind of an indication of maybe rounding the corner around the Taza Chocolate Building or something to make it seem like you're making a hard right turn there, but for Windsor Street to be continuous around the corner and for that threshold, for it to feel like a threshold onto the shared street. So appreciate that. And hope to see that in the further development of this as it moves forward. At the other end, I wonder, seeing this and understanding Ward Street is a one-way in, South Street is a one-way out. I know there's been ideas for South Street and thinking about whether that stays one way out, it goes to two-way, and how bikes are accommodated on that street. Seems like the current thinking is it stays one way in. But I wonder for Ward Street, I'd anticipate, it's kind of a busy street. Oh, interesting. Now I'm realizing South Street, this diagram is indicating South Street is changing direction. South
That's
Street
correct.
is
That's the
one way.
proposal,
Yeah.
of course, before it goes to a two-way condition ultimately.
Right. Okay. So there's a lot of traffic Bedford onto South Street today, and so I think that same traffic is going to be on Ward Street now turning in. So I wonder, it's kind of the shortest path to the parking entries for building 1 and 3. I guess it's similar if you take a left or a right there. I wonder whether the shared street treatment wants to continue around the corner to Ward Street. So as you kind of come in, it's very clear that in a similar way on the other side, you're kind of making that right, and that's the vehicular street. On Ward Street, you're coming in and you're making the left onto Harding, and that's the vehicular street. You don't make that right turn because that's part of the shared street. There'd also be an opportunity for that to kind of function as an extension of the civic space as well.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. I think we're indicating a tabled condition. Well, obviously it's all tabled, but we're indicating some type of a transition here where it changes from the below curb condition to the flush curb condition, and maybe there's an opportunity to kind of extend that down and then get more relationship with the southern part of civic space too as well.
Yeah, I think that's worth looking at. Well, maybe I'll leave it there for now, and others can make comments.
I was looking at the entrance diagram, specifically at building 5. It looks like for the most part, there's mostly like a generous space in front of most of the entrances. But just looking at building 5, it looks like there's a bench there, and it's just more of a pinch point. So I was just wondering if there was a strategy when you were developing this in terms of space in front of entrances and locations of the benches that, like as people exit that building and go up to the space in the street, if there was a strategy to, I don't know, enlarge that space at entrances and maybe where the benches are located.
For sure. I think, we obviously developed the concept for the thoroughfare. This is in advance of any real design for building 5. I think it's a good comment that there's a lot of proximity there to the where the bench is. I think we need to work through the design of Building 5, and there's probably an opportunity to slide the door left or right a bit as we get into that design. I think there's also a likelihood, like you see in the more detailed design of Building 2, where there's actually an arcade condition and the building facade is pulled back. There may be some type of a design here where that first floor gets pulled back a little bit in terms of how that door relates to the actual sidewalk condition. But I think that's a good comment, and we should definitely understand how that relates to the flex zone and the kind of fixed bench seating.
Yeah, I think that might be one of the few locations where there's kind of like a straight bench that's not adjacent to kind of like a more of a open space in the sidewalk. It looks like the ins and outs and pushes and pulls of the planners. It's letting the space come in and out, and the benches are responding to that. And that looks to be like one of the few places where it's just kind of like a sidewalk and a straight bench.
Yep, that's a good comment.
Deborah?
I know I appreciate that you addressed all the things we talked about last time. We asked you a lot of questions. My computer was misbehaving for a good part of your presentation, so I don't have any comments specifically, but I feel like this has moved in the right direction, and I really appreciate what you've shown us here. I'm curious with South Street, when that gets straightened, how that's going to change things here, but you may have spoken about that as I was going in and out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think obviously with the straightening of South Street, there's an opportunity to make that a more robust cross section with full bike facilities on both sides, parallel parking if the city wants to do that, and just a really good public realm cross section. But of course, the other thing that it does, because it is getting realigned and kind of somewhat straightened and pulled further south, is it results in a larger central open space, because Civic Space 1 and the resultant space of where South Street currently is, that will become one large open space effectively.
That's interesting. Yeah, that'll connect over there. Yeah, I think also it'll relieve, some people may choose that direct route rather than coming in towards the thoroughfare. I can't remember what that street is. I'm looking for it here. Yeah, I don't see the name.
Maybe I'll go to the more zoomed out one, Webster.
Well, coming off of Webster, you were showing a route that comes towards the thoroughfare and then goes down Windsor, from Webster to Windsor, yeah. Whereas I think people probably might just take South Street. I don't know if that has been studied and how that's anticipated to play into this, but.
Yeah, the South Street is definitely envisioned as like the primary kind of cross connection between Medford and Webster in the long range mobility goals.
Right, right.
Deborah, it is something that we're currently working on as part of our second master plan. So what we're calling Boynton South are the Nissenbaum properties to the south of this master plan. So that's something that we just started the permitting process on that. We have our neighborhood meeting at the end of this month. And so that's where we'll be talking to the public. And we've already started some discussions with the city on that South Street realignment. So lots to come there, and a lot of, work and many heads, spinning on how that's going to shake out. But ultimately it becomes the two-way connector between Medford and Webster, and I think it'll relieve a lot of traffic in the area.
Yeah, I think it'll clean up. Yeah, I mean, it'll leave the thoroughfare, I think, as a more precious place.
Right. And to Tim's point, like right now, there is a bike lane that kind of turns the corner from Windsor Place to Windsor Street. And so it'll be apparent that there's a curve there, and cars will want to go down Windsor rather than go through Thoroughfare 1. So I think that also is very helpful.
Right. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Quick question about the drop-off zone.
Mhm.
Is it intended for like that to be a kind of like a short-term wait where cars will go around the vehicle that's stopped or waiting, or is there enough room for that? And then I was also just wondering, depending on where these wind up, would there be like a special signage to indicate where these areas are, or possibly like a coating on the ground, like a material change or something?
Yeah, I think there will be some type of signage that I'm pretty sure the engineering department is going to want us to have that would designate those zones. I think, you know, with the modular aspect of the paving pattern, there's an opportunity there that we could do something a little different to kind of signify the extents of it on the ground plane. I think would be good. And I think because the curb to curb dimension, even though it's a flush curb, is 20 feet, that should be enough space for, you know, you would, you know, again, we don't expect a lot of traffic here, but that should be enough space for cars to kind of move around the parked pickup vehicle.
Okay.
That's what we're intending.
So as I've thought more about this, the ride share, we talked a little about this last time. I think I've been kind of back and forth. Does the street want to have designated spaces for that, just knowing that it's going to happen or not? And I think actually, you know, thinking about the character of this street, you wouldn't want to designate or specifically mark zones for rideshare drop off. You'd want to just let it happen everywhere. And that's kind of another traffic calming measure. The idea that Ubers are coming and stopping and people are getting out and walking across the street. And in the same way that cars will come and hopefully yield to pedestrians. You know, if a car stopped there and a bike comes up behind them and a car's come the other way, they yield. And I think it's very much in keeping with the character of the street. So I'd say don't designate the zones. Just let it happen.
Well, that said, you may have talked about this, but are there like shuttle buses to Kendall Square or other locations?
Yeah, there are.
Yeah. And how are those being accommodated? Again, I apologize if you already talked about this.
No problem. We didn't mention that yet. So right now they drop off at South Street right in front of Building 1. So Ian, if you go back to the big plan. Yeah, so right there's a drop-off zone, and that's kind of where they're stopping and letting people off to go to 101 South.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could keep that in the future and just have people walk through the civic space to get to buildings. Building 5 is the only one, and Building 2 that would need access by shuttle. And you know, it's not that far of a walk if you're commuting anyway. I wouldn't really want to create a huge drop off for shuttles up there on Thoroughfare 1. So I think we'd limit that to South Street.
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of autonomous, you know, shuttles and things like that is, you know, that we'll see maybe less individual drop off and more, you know, shared over time. And you just need the curb. You need a lot of curb space, you know, for those scenarios.
So you did a number of paving pattern studies, which I think they're all great and interesting. I think the idea of taking a texture and having it not just be uniform out there on the surface of the street would be great. But I think one thing that changed from the last version is it's now like a uniform material treatment along the length of the street. And I wonder, there's these parallel parking zones and planting zones, and it's creating along the face of the buildings an edge that separates the sidewalk from the street space. And I understand there's accessibility reasons for that and other things kind of driving that, but it is creating a barrier between the sidewalk and the street space. And in that sense, even with a different material treatment, it's going to function in those spaces somewhat like a traditional street. But there's these zones connecting Civic Space 3 and Civic Space 1 that really want to feel connected across them and encourage pedestrian movement across there. I wonder whether there's the opportunity for further refinement of this to further distinguish those zones and really carry the paving from Civic Space 1 across to Civic Space 3 and distinguish those zones from the rest of the street.
Right. So, you know, a treatment here, Tim, that would be, maybe it's a concentration of aggregate or color or something that really makes it feel, you know, it's the same materials, it's the same kit of parts, but it's kind of concentrated and focused in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the message throughout the street is everyone is welcome here. And the message at Civic Spaces, this is where everyone's really going to be, or at these crossing zones. And I think it's a signal to vehicles too that just be aware.
Yep.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it looks like there's a flush curb between the street and the civic space. Just wondering if that was kind of a requirement, or if that could lead across and kind of like be another connection between those two spaces.
Sure. So the lines that you see there are something that came out of our discussions with engineering about having, even though it is a shared condition, they really wanted to have a tactile strip between the shared zone and, you know, the traditional sidewalk areas. They felt like a thinner version of that would be expressed where we have the flex zones with the parking or the activated pods along the street. But in the area where there is no there won't be any parking or anything. They wanted to have a more robust tactile strip that would be there sort of for cane detection and things like that.
So my last comment, I think there's an indication of a range of colors here. The warmer browns at the parallel parking spots, the gray tones. I hope there's a mix of not just gray tones, but kind of earth tones as well. Maybe looking at building 3 for some of the material cues for paving as well, you know, that red terracotta color.
Yep. Yeah, we'll definitely look at that. I know that was a comment for the Civic Space as well, Civic Space 1, back when we reviewed that, about introducing more warmth and not having just the grays and the charcoals. So we will definitely do that.
Yeah, I think it's a way to make this feel unique and specifically different than the Seaport too, which is all grays.
Yep.
All right, we are coming up on our time here. So commissioners, what you need to vote on is if this project meets the NACTO design guidelines for a commercial shared street, and also to vote on incorporating tonight's design recommendations. Are you prepared for this?
Yes.
All right, great. Do I have a motion that this project meets the NACTO design guidelines for a commercial shared street?
So moved.
I have a second, seconded by Deborah. All right, roll call vote. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, this project has successfully met the design guidelines for the NACTO design guidelines for a commercial shared street. And then in terms of additional design guidance tonight, it sounds like you're recommending that additional emphasis and studying of the end conditions of the shared street really work to de-emphasize a car just coming onto the shared street. That the placement of the furniture could be further developed in relation to the exact building entrances. And I know that some buildings are not further in development, but that there's at least a little more flexibility for some gathering space in front of doorways. I think there's some mixed recommendations about pickup drop off for rideshare. So that seems to be an area that just needs further study, whether it's on the shared street or perhaps in a different location. The paving patterns, perhaps there should be a hierarchy with the pattern to emphasize spaces where you would normally see a lot of pedestrians versus occasional pedestrians. So a lot of pedestrians between the civic spaces versus some of the other locations. And that the paving pattern or treatment incorporate some additional color and warmth that can relate to some of the building materials to the neighborhood. I think that's what I've got from all of you guys. Does that sound right? All right.
Yeah, clarification on studying the unconditions was the recommendation to specifically study carrying the shared street down Harding to Ward.
Right, and a possible connection or extension of civic space too.
Yeah.
All right, great. Do I have a motion to incorporate the additional design guidance tonight?
So moved.
Someone? All right, motion by Deborah. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote. Deborah Fennick.
Yes.
Tim Hood.
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, the vote has passed that for this project to incorporate additional design guidance given tonight. That completes the votes for Thoroughfare 1. Thank you, 153 South Street team. You are complete. Congratulations.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you.
All right, last on the agenda this evening is 99 South Street. If that team could make themselves aware, raise their hand so Andrew Kreminski can make you make you presenters. It's been a long day. I'm getting tired here. I'm fading.
David, you should be all set to present the slides.
Are you able to see my screen? Sorry.
It came up for a second, but it disappeared.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it back up. What's happening here with my screen is when I go to the presentation, I lose the picture of you. So unfortunately, I won't be able to see your body language, but I'll be able to present the screen. Can you see the screen now?
No.
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 Okay.
You can see it now, David.
Okay. How's that?
All set.
Great.
All set? Okay. Thank you. So just to recap, we had gone through the massings and the fenestration and the materiality, and what was agreed upon was option 3, which was the stepped or the zipper scheme. We also went through the materiality, and I think between the glass curtain wall, the metal, and the masonry terracotta, it was decided that the masonry, the warmer material on this kind of new industrial feel, was the appropriate materiality. Just to recap what we heard, we were looking for the longer views from a distance, options for the different number and size of steps. So we'll take a look at the zippers. Also looking at the north elevation, I think part of the concern was that it wasn't quite as welcoming as and prominent as some of the others. And then the streetscape along thoroughfare, one not providing enough pedestrian activity. So Ian will jump back in on that as well. So starting with the long views, this is the view from Prospect Hill. You can see in the foreground Union Square, and then in the background the 99 South. And then from Union Square, you can see the profile of 99 South in behind it. So a lot of the development that's currently happening in the foreground will make it difficult to see the buildings in the background. And then lastly, we have the view over the top of Target. And you can see the residential building that will be in the foreground. You can see 101 just to the right of 99. And then going into the zipper studies. This is the previous scheme, and I think the thing that was very, very telling and very helpful in our conversation was the recognition of the steps. And currently we have 4 steps. I think there was the recognition, excuse me, that the step was a little out of sequence with the double scale kind of module that we have going. So the idea that we have 4 steps here, a little bit, one of the things that we're looking at, and you'll see that with the blue lines, is where the structure is. So we're looking to have the steps time out with that vertically, and then horizontally, as you had mentioned, with the 2-story steps. So going into a series of alternatives, on the left-hand side, we have the previous, which is basically the 4-step. The option A is 3 steps. Then we went to 5 steps. Then we looked at a 1-story step, and then also removing the frame. So we'll go through all 5 of these options. The first option really looks at 3 steps. This is the view from the corner of Harding and South Street. You can see one adjacent to it. Again, the idea of the base, middle, top, and the setback along that edge, along the southern edge. And then the stepping as you're going back towards the north. So looking at it in elevation, this is along, on the right-hand side is along Harding Street. You can see the setback, the stepping in 3 steps, and the idea that it's timing out with the 2 stories of steps, so the 4 floors. And then the north and west elevations. And then looking at it a little bit more closely. So again, this is at the corner of Harding on the right-hand side and South Street going off to the left. You can see 101 on the left-hand side, the arcade, the forecourt, the arcade, and then the setback at the 4th floor. And then you can see the zipper kind of stepping back to the north as it rises towards the height, towards the residential portion of the building. The option B, which is 5 steps. So you can start to see very similarly in this perspective. When we're looking from the east elevation, this is along Harding Street on the right-hand side. Again, the building is stepping up, the longer, kind of stretching out that sense of the 4-story kind of base. And then the steps begin to step. And again, it's timing out with the structural grid and then stepping up to the upper floor. So this one, instead of 2 2-story grids, really takes in 3-story grids at this location. And one of the concerns in the next is that the height of this one really starts to get a little tall along the north, the thoroughfare side of the street. So it really becomes a little bit more of a scaling move in comparison to the 3 steps. And then again, you can see this along Harding Street and South Street. The long, the kind of first cut is really taking in the base of the building, and the smaller steps stepping up to the upper level. And then we did look at a 1-story, just to see how that kind of times out with the 4 steps. So you can start to see that instead of 2 levels, it really takes in 1 level. And again, starting at along Harding Street, you can see the one-story cut. It steps up, continues to step up, and then stepping up again to really take in the two kind of story module vertically. And then it kind of hits at the mid-level along Thoroughfare on the left-hand side, which is the north elevation. And then looking at, again, from the corner of Harding and South, the idea of the four-story, it starts to step, and one-story steps, and then steps up as it rises towards ascends towards to the north, towards Thoroughfare. And then no frame. We did also look at not creating the kind of the frame that kind of wraps around and defines that kind of separation between the two. And it was just an interesting way of thinking about the detail here. And this was, again, the four-step version of this, which was timing out again with the structure. But again, the idea of eliminating the frame. So the terracotta kind of wraps around the edges and provides that kind of transition in the stepping. And then going back to the summary of the three, the previous, the three-step, the five-step, the four steps with the one-story, and then the frameless option. And then moving to the north elevation, and this was a comment that, you know, the south or the north side of the building along Thoroughfare didn't feel as friendly and welcoming. So the idea that we were employing the idea of that retail base, so really stretching out the storefront in option A. Option B starts to introduce a canopy, and then option C starts to delineate the entry sequence into the building from the Thoroughfare. One of the things that we had discussed is the primary entry is at the corner of Harding and South Street, but we do have a secondary entry coming off the Thoroughfare. So the previous scheme, again, timing out with the module continuing down. So you see on the right-hand side that the pilaster continues down along that edge. And what we wanted to do is try to really open that up and make it feel a little bit more friendly and really delineate the difference between the base, middle, and top. So in the second option, or option A, it's really starting to take or remove some of the teeth that were continuing down, really stretching that kind of retail experience out and really kind of emphasizing that. The next looks at adding the canopy. So I'm just going to flash back and forth. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see how we're looking at creating a little canopy there that starts to create a scaling element off of that, the setback along Thoroughfare. And then lastly, in option C looks at delineating a little bit more deliberate entry into the office, really kind of creating that separation between the two. So I'll flash back and forth between the previous, the current, are really trying to open it up, providing the canopy, and then providing a little bit more delineated entry into the building itself. And then lastly, a summary of the three, the previous, where we're bringing all of the pilasters down, eliminating some of the teeth to really open it up and expand that kind of experience, very similar to Harding Street that you see here on the left-hand side, where you have much more emphasis on the retail, the canopy or the canopy at the entry. And then here's a view looking down Thoroughfare at the corner of Harding. So you start to see that we're picking up that same kind of 33-foot module along Harding Street and really bringing it back to the northern part of the building, making it much more welcoming and opening it up towards Thoroughfare. And then the view coming down with 101 in the foreground and then 99 in the background. And then I'll turn it over now to Ian.
Thanks, David. So here is the previous plan that we had shown for the northern side, and the comment that we received, similar to some of the architectural related comments, is that the landscape felt a bit compressed, kind of too linear, and really didn't sort of respond to either the building facade or the Thoroughfare in terms of having adequate volumetric space for spillouts outside the building face. So if you can go to the next slide. So we've reconfigured, and keeping in mind that we need a certain amount of green to be maintained in order to meet the green score. What we did is we kind of consolidated a larger green mass sort of in the center portion of the building, and then respected the primary double door into the main quarter of the building on the left-hand side by having flanking trees on either side of that door. The lines there read as sort of really solid rectangles, but the idea is that those plant beds would be flush with grade, so they're not obstructions. You're able to walk over the rectangular space. But we feel this gives space on the left-hand corner to have some outdoor seating, as well as on the right-hand side to have a nice plaza adjacent to the building, and kind of responding more to what's happening on the thoroughfare one side. And that is our last slide. Thank you.
Questions?
Does the design team have a preference on the stepping options?
We do. I think the preference would be the 2 steps.
3 step.
Or the 3 steps, sorry.
Option
We
A.
looked at so many different options. So the idea that we kind of simplified, I think one of the things that was very telling was this original diagram, that starting to think about how, you know, it not only timed out with the structure, but timed out with the 2-story kind of expression. I think, you know, the kind of the long linear kind of feel to this makes it a little bit more simplified. I think the idea that the 5 steps made it feel a little bit too busy. And it also raised the, along thoroughfare, it raised the height of the break a little bit too high for a scaling element. So we thought that this, the 2-story modules seemed to make a nicer transition. And then I think the preference still is to have the frame versus no frame on the building.
Can you
Thank you.
show the elevation of the side elevation of number 3? Yeah. Yeah. I think that I agree that that this one feels the most respectful of the terracotta patterns that are created and language. So, and the scale on the north, I think, is really important also.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. I think the 3 steps. I like the 2-story read versus the 1-story read option that you showed, and I agree that the 5 steps, you know, it kind of makes the one elevation a little bit too high. So I think this is a nice kind of balance. And I would also I also think that the frame helps the architecture and define that glass area.
Is the glass in the same plane as the terracotta, or close to the, or were you able to recess it a little bit?
Yeah, it's recessed.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was looking at, I thought at one point last time we met, you know, you said it was pretty close, and I was looking at the more closely at the renderings that you had, and it did look like it was not coplanar with the terracotta. Is it coplanar with the glass that's framed by the terracotta?
It's slightly different, but it's close.
And I'm glad you studied it without the frame, because I think the frame is really important too. So, yeah, so I agree with your preference also.
So I think this is a great view. It's a really, the building it's a dynamic building from this perspective. I mean, there's a clear differentiation between the basement on top, but the porch on the south side is great, looking over the plaza, which is well scaled to a building of this height. I feel like this building is very much oriented towards the south. And I wonder if there's the opportunity to bring the same dynamism to the north side as well. I think one thing that would really change the north side, and I think be consistent with the overall design party of the building, would be if there was an additional upper story setback above the zipper piece goes in a similar park, or I'm sorry, not park, outdoor space provided adjacent to the tenant space on that upper story. Wondering if that's something that was studied.
We had that in the beginning, but it was more of that it would set back and then come back and lever over and create like a terrace on the north side. Because of zoning, like we said last time, we got rid of it and then didn't push back the top stories and keep them there just because it eats our floor plate. And in the lab world, it's all about the floor plate and rentable. So we really don't want to minimize that ideal floor plate because right now it's kind of tight. So it would really hurt the project if we did that. We were kind of hoping that by opening up the base levels, it would kind of bring a more open feel to this side and make it more welcoming.
Yeah, I mean,
from the tight, like from a tight vantage point, if you're on thoroughfare 1, you won't really perceive much looking up beyond the zipper. Like it's going to be hard to perceive if you're standing on the road directly next to 99th Street.
Yeah. I think from the pedestrian perspective on thoroughfare 1, it doesn't make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have like a really far vantage point for this building.
Well, I mean, I think the view studies show that that this is going to be seen from a number of vantage points, especially from the east, where this will be the tallest building adjacent to that existing neighborhood. There won't be another building to the east of that.
Actually, we're developing a building to the east. This building.
In my direction.
We have a future plan to develop something across Harding. It's in the works. So there will be a building that will cover pretty much most of this facade view. But it won't go up the 9 stories, or because it's in a MR mid-rise district. So it'll somewhat create a scale transition, which we think is good towards the neighborhood that's on the east, which would help.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I guess that's not part of what we're reviewing today, and it's not part of the approved master plan to date.
Right.
So, I mean, to me, the north side of the building feels very planar. It lacks the dynamism of the south side. And that is the Somerville facing side of the building. And I think the break in the terracotta bays will help that, but it's still a plane. And I think there will be a box-like reading of that. I think it's unfortunate that our own zoning is maybe getting in the way a little of the ability to shape the building and to kind of achieve what it sounds like you're interested in doing, and maybe what we may want as well. I'm curious, on the south side, at the end of the zipper, the glass wall is set in the face of the terracotta. So there's a soffit condition there. Yeah, exactly. And even it's even more apparent on the no frame option where you see that terracotta soffit returning in. Why couldn't something like that, why couldn't there be a similar change in plane on the north side where the glass follows?
So that is actually the case on the north. It's just that here it shows more exaggerated because of the view as well as that terrace that you're seeing on the south. But on the north side, it's the exact same detail that you have there above with the glass and the frame. So you're going to perceive that depth. I think the angle view isn't helping the rendering, at least.
Should you
And-
guys pull up the north elevations? You have a few options that you presented.
Well, so if you look at if you look at the west elevation, for example, any of the west elevations or the east for that matter. So yeah, it could be that option. You can see on the right hand side, you can see how that the pane of glass is
Oh, I get what you mean. I got what you mean.
pulled in from the end, whereas that's not happening on the north.
Right. No, we can, I mean, these drawings are like super schematic, so we can make sure that it's the same detail there, and I assume it would be because that unitized kind of wants to be proud of the zipper, which will most likely be a stick-built system. And so that depth there that you have on the south side would likely be mirrored on the north side, same detail. I don't think it's drawn accurately.
Yeah, that's more than just a difference between systems. I mean, that's 3 feet, 4 feet. I mean, I think that's the scale of change in plane that's going to be needed.
Right.
For that really to read through. And so that's locating columns. That's where that structural line is along the north side.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Yep.
Does that happen on the east and west also? Or is the structure not support that?
Yeah, there's an extension of the frame that gives you the illusion of it that depth, Deborah.
Right. So if we talk about the north side, or are you done? Did you have other things you wanted to say, Tim?
No, we can talk about the north
Okay.
side.
Yeah, I really appreciate the studies we've done here. I think the B and C are pretty strong. I guess to some of the points that you were making, Tim, I feel like B, in the way people would experience the building, having, that scaling element, as you called it, David, of the canopy, I think is a good move. So option B, I think C is interesting and could be I think it's more interesting when you look at the landscape design that Ian presented. But in the end, I think having that scaling element along the whole side is more in keeping with the building and makes the north distinct from, that side, the east side entrance, which is a little more localized, right?
We agree. That's our preferred option as well.
I would also agree with that. I think adding the landscape really helps to kind of visualize what was going on this facade. So thank you for showing that. I think that option B is a good scaling element, and it doesn't treat that door as like a main door, but it still kind of recognizes it as an entrance.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate on the zipper options a little. I think for me, it's between the 3 and the 5. And I'm wondering, especially given our discussion about the north facade and that there isn't the ability to set back those upper stories, I think as a scaling element on that street, I don't think it really matters where the glass piece is, whether it's 6 stories up or 8 stories up. You're still going to have the top stories of the building coplanar with the lower stories of the building. So it's a 12-story building from that street. I think there's something pretty dynamic about the 5-step option. Just thinking about how it would be seen again from a distance, especially if there are lower buildings that are built next to it. It gets that zipper up tall enough that it may be seen from a distance. But I wonder, yeah, I'd just be curious to get your reaction to that and other commissioners.
Our reaction was that it just feels really busy, and that the kind of the module then becomes very weird because it's like we're condensing the zipper action in the center, just because of what we have. But we could spread it out. But then it's like, would we do this or just go back to the in between, which is the 4-step, what we started with?
Yeah. I think one thing with 3-step that with only 3 steps, the similarity or difference between each step is pretty apparent. And I think the width of each one of these steps is, as it's currently designed, is different. So the top one is 5 window bays wide, bottom one is 6 window bays wide, and the middle one is 9. And I understand those are aligning with the lines of the structural grid, and there's a rigor and a logic to that. I wonder if with this option, even if it's breaking with the logic of the alignment with the structural base, whether maybe that top piece is 6 wide, so it's the same as the bottom one.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that might help it proportionally.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that has been a point of conversation. And I think, one of the things that I did like about the 3-step is that at least at the south side, the elongated depth of the first one, of really going deeper with this instead of really creates that sort of 4-story base piece. And then, getting to the top, it kind of steps up, ascends and ascends again. I kind of like that the top one is a little bit of a different module, and that it kind of gets cleaved a little bit at the end, so that it's a little higher and it steps up. I do think that there's a scaling here that it feels a little bit more comfortable than the going 3 double bays up to the top. And I think that's why we ended up, Tim, opting for that particular one. The thing is, that the cemetery gods get upset when we start to go off grid, where this tooth ends up coming down and then it doesn't quite align with the other bay at the base of the building. So that's why we're opting for that. And then, most of the time you won't see it like this. I think what you will see is, more looking down Harding from these perspectives. So it's a little bit more maybe interesting. I think the 5-step felt like it was a little bit too busy in through the center here.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the comments that you made are a lot of the comments that we've been kind of debating internally as well.
Yeah, I would say my reaction to the 5-step, it's great to see that option, but it just in terms of the aggressiveness of how it travels across the facade versus the kind of the calmness of the terracotta, it felt like it was a little too aggressive, which is why I was looking at the 3-step.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting close to time.
And I also want to emphasize Tim's point about the recess. I think having the same detail at both ends will help. And some sort of change in plane in that north facade, or a little bit more change in plane that balances the south. I think that would help.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a good point.
I would love to see, you know, this team and work with the city further to really understand if there's the opportunity to pull that glass plane back and create a balcony up there. I think there's benefit, and this is something that the development team is interested in. I think there's benefit for the city in terms of the quality of the urban environment, and for the building. I think I would love to see something like that on this. But for that recessed detail to be built, and there's a column line along that wall, there's going to need to be a commitment to structural transfer or whatever else is necessary to make that work.
I think it would be more interesting to overhang. Actually, like that whole top shifted, you know, and I know that can't be done. I know that that's not acceptable. But I think that would be even more interesting, actually, on the north side.
Yeah, I mean, that was our first, like, we have renderings of it, but it was shot down in the first meeting.
Maybe one of the reasons that I keep with the three-step option, my eye keeps being drawn to the width of the zipper elements is because there's such a rigor to the building. The repetition of this single two-story bay on all sides, around all sides. At the base, there's a repetition of the same bay again and again. And I think, like we talked about last time, there's an elegance to that, well proportioned throughout. But then we get to this very prominent zipper element, and each module is slightly different. And it's not like there's two really narrow ones at the end and one big one in the middle. They're close, but not quite.
I think that's part of the dynamic piece that we like, Tim. I think one of the things that we felt when they got too equal is that the rigor was too, and he Park, our senior designers on as well, and he actually prefers the 4-step instead of the 3-step because it basically is the tear in the building that breaks away from the rigor. I think one of the dynamic aspects that we liked was that it wasn't so literal in the way we were creating that crease, and that this was a little bit more interesting where the first one ends up having that extra half bay which creates the setback, and then it goes to a longer one and then shorter one on the back. So we kind of liked it deliberately, I guess, that it was kind of making that departing from the rigor of the rest of the building.
Is the commission ready to start voting on this project?
Let's just go. I mean, thank you for that explanation. I just want to go back to the other commissioners and ask the question. Do we think I appreciate that this study was developed. Do we think the 3-step is an improvement over the previous, the 4-step?
As a way to officially put it on the record, I mean, we should vote on the zipper options as well as the north facade options, since there were several. So I mean, I we can vote, and you can say no if you don't like, for example, the 3-step, if we're taking a vote on the 3-step. I mean, I put it to you guys if you would like to motion to vote for the street on the 3-step option.
Yeah.
So moved.
All right. So we'll take a vote on the zipper options, that the 3-step is the preferred option from the commission. Motion by Deborah. Do I have a second?
A second.
Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote for the 3-step option. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, the 3-step option is the voted on option. On the north elevation, I think there was a couple of you indicated option B. Do I have a motion for the approval of option B?
So moved.
All right, motioned by Deborah. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote on option B for the north facade. Deborah Fennick,
Yes. Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right. So the other votes that we have to take this evening are if the design guidelines have been met for the high-rise district, or just for the high-rise, and voting to incorporate any additional design guidance. Do I have a motion that this project has met the design guidelines for high-rise?
So moved.
All right, I heard Deborah first. So motioned by Deborah. Do I have a second? Seconded
Second.
by Tim Hood. Roll call vote. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, this project has met the high-rise design guidelines. And then the additional design guidance, it sounds like there's some additional work to accommodate perhaps a mirrored condition at the zipper between the south facade and the north facade with the windows and the frame, right? All right.
Yes.
It sounds like most of the other areas were really about the specific things that we voted on. Am I missing something?
I think last time we saw this project, we talked about how the terracotta was terminating at the top. I think there's going to be review of that, maybe getting slightly taller. Has that been looked at, or is that not an option to look at?
Not
I think
sure about that.
we can make it a design recommendation if you would like them to look a little further at the top.
Yeah,
Right now, the top story does go up another level, so that's a fake last level that covers some of the.
Yeah, we did raise the wall system up an additional floor to,
Okay.
Reduce the impact of the penthouse and,
Okay.
make a little bit more transparency there so that there's kind of a, you can see that it's not just a covering it, but a little visual transition between the top of the facade and the penthouse itself.
Gotcha. So it's already reflected here.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so then I think the additional design guidance is just about the zipper and the north and south facades. Do I have a motion for the design recommendations?
So moved. I'm the one whose stomach is growling, I think.
Motioned by Deborah. Do I have a second?
I will second.
Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right. That completes the votes for the 99 South Street project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate the feedback and the process. It really helped us see the project, and we're going to continue to refine that, and we'll keep you guys posted.
I think this is going to be an elegant addition to Boynton Yards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback.
Since this is our last case of the evening, do I have a motion to end the meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote to end the meeting. Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.